In 1994, Mauro Prosperi, an experienced Italian ultramarathon runner, was participating in one of the most grueling and prestigious races in the world, the Marathon des Sables. This annual event takes place in the heart of the Sahara Desert, covering over 150 miles across one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Runners must contend with extreme heat, shifting sand dunes, and an unforgiving environment. The race is often described as the toughest foot race on Earth, and only the fittest and most determined can survive its challenges. Prosperi, an accomplished runner with a passion for long-distance races, had prepared meticulously for the event. He was no stranger to endurance events, having participated in many ultramarathons around the world. He was confident that he could handle the extreme conditions of the Sahara, just as he had done with countless races before. But even an experienced ultramarathon runner like Prosperi couldn't anticipate the incredible and life-threatening ordeal that lay ahead of him. The race began as planned in the desert, with Prosperi and nearly 1,000 other participants running across the vast sand dunes. The first few days were grueling but manageable. Temperatures soared well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the runners had to navigate through sandstorms, steep dunes, and scorching sun. But for Prosperi, this was familiar terrain. He had trained for conditions like these and was determined to finish the race. However, on the fourth day of the race, disaster struck. A sandstorm rolled in, quickly reducing visibility to near zero. The runners, who had been making their way through the desert with the help of the race organizers' markers, found themselves suddenly lost in the vast sea of sand. Prosperi, unable to see or orient himself, became separated from the rest of the runners. The storm made it nearly impossible for him to retrace his steps or find his way back to the race route. What began as an unfortunate detour quickly turned into a fight for survival. As the storm passed, Prosperi realized that he had wandered far off the race path. His navigation equipment and map were useless in the endless expanse of desert. He was alone in the Sahara, disoriented and lost. The heat of the desert, which had already been oppressive during the race, now felt like an insurmountable force. Prosperi had run out of food and water, and with no way of signaling for help, he found himself in a truly dire situation. The Marathon des Sables had been designed with safety measures in place, including checkpoints along the route and rescue teams to assist any runners in distress. But with the storm having completely disoriented him, and with no immediate way to contact anyone, Prosperi was now fighting the most brutal opponent of all, the unforgiving desert. After realizing he was lost in the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert, Mauro Prosperi's sense of control over his fate began to unravel. As the hours turned into days, the reality of his dire situation set in. Alone in the desert, without supplies or help, he had to rely on his experience, wits, and sheer willpower to survive. Prosperi's first priority was water, as dehydration in the desert can set in rapidly and prove fatal. However, his water supply had long run out, and he found himself walking aimlessly across the barren landscape, desperately searching for any source of life or relief. The intense heat during the day, often exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, sapped his strength and left him barely able to move. During the night, the temperature would plummet, leaving him exposed to the freezing cold without the warmth of shelter or clothing. After the first 24 hours, Prosperi realized that his only chance of survival was to keep moving and hope that he would encounter a nomadic camp or another source of help. But as he trekked across the desert, the harsh conditions began to take their toll. The days blurred together as he fought fatigue, hunger, and disorientation. With no map and no sense of direction, it felt like he was walking in circles, surrounded by endless dunes. The landscape was as beautiful as it was cruel, offering no signs of civilization or hope. On the second day, the first signs of hunger set in. Without any food, Prosperi was beginning to feel his strength wane. The constant walking in the scorching sun drained his energy, but he knew he could not afford to stop. Then, on the third day, a desperate thought crossed his mind. He had to find food to stay alive. It was then that he remembered a critical survival tactic: eating whatever he could find, even if it seemed unappetizing. As he continued through the sand, Prosperi noticed some bats flying overhead. In his state of desperation, he decided to try and catch one. Using his bare hands, he managed to kill a bat, tearing into it to consume the flesh raw. The taste was far from pleasant, but the small amount of nutrition gave him just enough energy to continue his struggle. Over the next several days, Prosperi's situation grew more desperate. He ate snakes he found in the sand, and he even consumed the occasional insect, relying on whatever he could find in the barren desert. But despite these efforts, he remained without water, and dehydration continued to rob him of his strength. He began to hallucinate, seeing mirages of water and shelter, and sometimes hearing voices calling to him from the distance. The heat during the day became unbearable, and at night, the cold was so intense that it was nearly impossible to get any rest. Every moment of survival became a struggle. Each step, each breath, was a fight against exhaustion and despair. His thoughts turned to his family, his wife and children, and the loved ones he hoped would soon know he was safe. Yet, as days passed and his body continued to weaken, those thoughts began to fade. The mind, too, was being worn down by the constant battle for survival. Prosperi knew that unless he found help soon, he would not last much longer. But then, on the 9th day, a small miracle occurred. As he staggered through the desert, dehydrated, delirious, and on the brink of collapse, he spotted movement on the horizon. A small group of nomads, traveling through the desert, had appeared. They had been out looking for camels when they stumbled upon the nearly lifeless Italian runner. Seeing his condition, they quickly rushed to his aid, offering him water and food. The nomads, part of a local tribe familiar with the harshness of the Sahara, took him into their care. They helped him get back to their camp, where he could begin the slow process of recovery. Prosperi was given rehydration salts and food to restore his strength, and over the next few days, he slowly regained his ability to walk and speak coherently. It was a rescue that came at the very last possible moment. By the time Prosperi was finally brought to safety, he had lost a staggering amount of weight, and his body was covered in blisters and sores from the exposure to the elements. He had survived on a minimal amount of water, bat flesh, snakes, and sheer willpower. But against all odds, he had made it out of the Sahara alive. Mauro Prosperi's rescue from the Sahara Desert marked the end of an unimaginable ordeal, but it was only the beginning of his journey back to health and his eventual return to normal life. When the nomads found him on the 9th day, he was barely alive. His body had been pushed to its absolute limits, and the physical toll of surviving on so little had left him near death. The dehydration, exposure to the harsh desert environment, and lack of food had almost claimed him, yet against all odds, he survived. The recovery process was slow and painful. Prosperi was transported back to a nearby town, where medical professionals could treat his numerous injuries. His body was severely dehydrated, and his organs had begun to shut down from the lack of water. He had lost 18 pounds during his 9 days of survival, and his immune system was weakened by the extreme conditions. In addition to the physical wounds, the emotional and psychological effects of his harrowing ordeal were just as profound. The hallucinations, the isolation, and the constant fear of death had taken a toll on his mental health, and it would take time for him to process everything he had experienced. As Prosperi recuperated, he was surrounded by his family and friends, who were both relieved and shocked by his miraculous return. The journey back to health was long, but his resilience and determination to survive kept him going. He slowly regained strength, but the scars of the Sahara would never fully fade. In interviews after his recovery, Prosperi spoke about the loneliness, fear, and desperation he had felt during his days in the desert. But he also reflected on the profound lessons he learned during those 9 days. One of the most significant realizations for Prosperi was the strength of the human will to survive. Despite being abandoned in one of the world's most extreme environments, he had found the will to fight, even when all hope seemed lost. His ability to keep moving forward, to find food and water where none seemed to exist, and to endure the unbearable conditions was a testament to his inner strength and his will to live. The experience also changed his perspective on life. Prosperi often spoke about how the Sahara, in all its harshness, had taught him the importance of the present moment. In the desert, he had no past or future. He simply existed, focused on the basic instinct to survive. This sense of being in the moment, coupled with the immense vulnerability he had felt, shifted his view on life's priorities. He became more appreciative of the small things, the simple pleasures and human connections that are easy to take for granted in everyday life. While recovering physically, Prosperi also began to share his story with the world. The media became fascinated by his survival tale, and he was interviewed by newspapers and magazines. His story became an inspiration to many, and it raised awareness about the dangers of ultramarathons and endurance events in extreme conditions. Many saw Prosperi as a symbol of resilience, and his tale of survival was seen as an extraordinary example of human determination. As time passed, Prosperi went on to write a book about his experience, entitled Sahara, My Survival, translated into English as Sahara, the Desert Survivor. In the book, he detailed his ordeal in the Sahara, describing the physical and emotional challenges he faced, the moments of despair, and the small victories that kept him alive. The book not only captivated readers with its incredible survival story, but also gave them insight into the psychological toll of being stranded in one of the world's harshest environments. Years later, Prosperi would reflect on how the experience in the Sahara shaped his life in ways he had not anticipated. He continued to run ultramarathons, but with a deeper sense of caution and respect for the environments in which he competed. The Sahara experience was a stark reminder of the thin line between life and death, and he approached future races with a renewed appreciation for the risks involved. The legacy of Prosperi's survival in the Sahara lives on as one of the most incredible survival stories of the modern era. His story not only highlights the immense physical and psychological strength required to survive in the desert, but also serves as a reminder of the power of the human spirit. It is a story of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable will to survive, and it continues to inspire anyone who faces adversity, whether in extreme conditions or in the challenges of everyday life. Mauro Prosperi's incredible survival story in the Sahara Desert reminds us of the strength of the human will and the importance of never giving up, no matter the odds. It teaches us that in the face of isolation, fear, and uncertainty, we have the power to keep moving forward. Prosperi's experience is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and serves as a reminder to appreciate the simple things in life and cherish each moment. Let his story inspire you to face your own challenges with determination, knowing that, with the right mindset, even the most impossible situations can be overcome.